Welcome, everyone. This is our first program in more than a year. Our last historical study program at 8th and D Street in San Bernardino was in January of 2020. And we were very anxious to get together with our members. We have our quarterly publication, Pioneer Tales, which if you're on my email list or if you're a member, you get. However, we haven't had any other interaction. So fortunately, Kristine Forbes contacted me and asked if we would like to would be interested in having her as our guest speaker through Zoom. So here we are. Our speaker today is Kristine Forbes, and her program is going to be really, really outstanding. So now we'll turn it over to Kristine.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I'm so thrilled to have so many of you coming and sharing what my biggest passion is. One of my major interests in life is the Lyman and Rich wagon train, shockingly. I do love history so much, and I've been spending a number of years researching the San Bernardino colony, and of course the Lyman and Rich wagon train was so foundational to that. That's been a real key part of my research. And I have my colleague, Tom Brown, if you want to wave Tom to see, he's on that call here too. He's been working with me for several years as well. And so he's going to be monitoring a chat stream going on here. So as I go along, if there's a question of clarification, did I say this thing or did I mean that, or could you repeat whatever, go ahead and put that in the chat. And Tom will answer it along the way if he can. He'll also keep track of questions and make sure to raise them at the end if you don't want to answer it, ask it again yourself. But so I couldn't do this without him, and I'm so glad he's here. Anyway, I am, and you can see the way I phrased the title of this, that San Bernardino being the anchor settlement that connected the Great Salt Lake to the sea. And that is really the underlying theme that I want to share with you. And
looking for that slide, Kristine.
What?
Looking for your slide.
Looking for my slide?
We are seeing your face.
You don't see, oh, I didn't share the screen? I thought I shared it.
Okay, this is it right here, Deseret to the Pacific.
Do you see it?
I see Deseret to the Pacific right now.
Yeah.
Right. But before, there was another slide.
Do you see this? Do you see searching for my ancestors?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, good. So how did I get started in this whole thing? And by the way, I was born in San Bernardino, and I was the 4th generation in my family to be born there. And I got into this because I was wondering at the age of, I don't know, 50 or something, why the heck did my ancestor, my second great grandfather, ever end up there? What brought him there? What the heck? And so searching for my ancestor in San Bernardino, I discovered Mormon history, and that has been my passion ever since. So here's a picture of my second great grandfather, Robert Poppet, and then his in-laws, who are also colony pioneers, Gasham Case and his wife, Susan Case, and that's at 8th and H. So anyway, that's how I got started here. And I quickly got to know Sue Payne, who is also on the call, who, if you want to know anything about San Bernardino history, you just must know Sue Payne, and we've become friends, and she's helped so much. What I realized is that there's a treasure trove of information about the colony that so few people outside of San Bernardino know anything about. In the California room at the library, there's all kinds of records that we've actually, Tom and I have transcribed and put into a data set. So we have a whole data set of all of the pioneers we could gather, putting all kinds of records. The Mary Lewis Family Group Sheet Collection, Sue is working now with the Claremont Graduate School students to digitize that, which is an amazing resource for genealogists and other historians. There are wonderful documents at the San Bernardino County Archives. We've also transcribed those and put them in our data set. There are wonderful things at the Historical and Pioneer Society building that we've put in. And then I also, of course, went to the Church History Library in Salt Lake and found things there that are widely available, but I'm not sure if anyone really looks at things like the branch journal. Maybe they do, but I'll tell you, the tithing records, I'm not sure people have looked at those. We have transcribed those. And I know some of the Mormon historians I've talked with, they didn't even know that there would have been such a thing as a tithing in San Bernardino. And I assure you, the colony was a very successful one. They had more Mormons there in that branch than anywhere outside of Salt Lake City during the colony years. And it's wonderful information. So when I first went to the Salt Lake Library, though, I met with one of the church historians, and he was so helpful to me when I was talking about Robert Poppet, who had been in the British mission. Oh, he wanted to show me all things about that. And then when I mentioned, and he, of course, went to the San Bernardino colony, his whole aspect changed. His face dropped. I just dropped so many levels in his estimations, and he basically turned away and said, oh, well, then he wasn't really Mormon. And that was the beginning of what I've now come to see as a pretty pervasive idea of this sort of legacy of shame, or this apostate narrative that San Bernardino was really just a magnet for the spiritually weak, and a good Mormon would have never left the Great Basin. And I find that pretty common throughout the research. And this started with because the gold rush tainted the pioneers with the Lyman and Rich wagon train. So the idea that has been seeded is that people just joined it so they could go get rich in the gold country. And there's this document that was called the Manuscript History of Brigham Young, or there are various other things that it's been named as over the years, written by church historians, is where this idea of there were only supposed to be 20 people that went to the colony, but over 500 went, and he was just sick at the sight of it. This idea is so accepted as true that now almost every mention in any book of the colony mentions this only 20 were supposed to go, and they don't even cite it. They don't even bother to put a footnote. It's just so true, apparently. So what we're going to do today is we're going to examine 5 underlying ideas that I think bear close scrutiny and see whether they actually are true. The first one, that Brigham Young was really only agreed reluctantly to planning the colony. He really didn't want to do it. Another one, way too many people went. Third one is most of those people were unauthorized, and they really were disloyal. They were just trying to get out of Dodge. So those four are really part of that apostate narrative. And then the 5th one, it was just a failure. It was a costly failure. Should have never done it. So what I'm going to start with, we're going to start with the first one. Brigham Young was reluctant. We're going to test that out. But the first thing I'm going to do is launch a poll. We're going to do this fun feature that hopefully I can do where, oh dear, I'm not sure if I can do it because I'm not the host. Darn it. I don't think I can do it. Well, anyway, we're going to pretend we have a poll. I'm curious how many people would think that who it was that had the first idea, who was the original idea. And if you want to unmute yourself and shout something out, I'd love to hear what you think. Who has an idea of who had the first idea?
Jefferson Hunt.
You think Hunt? Okay, Daniel.
Was it Joseph Smith?
Joseph Smith is who? Who's saying that?
Me, Michelle Lovato.
Michelle. Okay, could be. Anyone else have ideas?
Jefferson Hunt for sure.
Jefferson Hunt for sure. Okay. Well, let's go through and let's just see. Was it Charles Rich? And in fact, we can find that Charles Rich did endorse purchasing the ranch. There's a letter to Brigham Young in 1850 in April that he was really encouraging that purchase. So let's see if we can find anyone earlier. And in fact, we do. Almost a Lyman authorized purchasing the ranch, and that is mentioned in Charles Rich's journal in February 22nd, 1850. Let's look if there's anything earlier. Who said Jefferson Hunt? Some people did. He definitely wrote a letter to Brigham Young suggesting they purchase Williams Rancho, and that was in 47, just at the end of his tenure in the Mormon battalion. Can we go any earlier? Why, yes, we can. Brigham Young, actually, in December 6, 1848, said, when they opened up in his first meeting back from winter quarters, he went back with the rest of the apostles to basically live for good in the Great Basin. And he said their first item of business is going to be to plant a colony at the head of the California Gulf. And we can even go back farther to 1845 when they were still in Nauvoo, Illinois. And he said, California is a country we can locate and have all the advantages of navigation and commerce. So now if you would look at a lot of the church historians talking about what Brigham Young meant by these things, they'll say, well, California was Upper California, which included the Great Basin. And so of course he was really talking about the Great Basin. Well, let's look at that. So there's the Council of 50 was the group of about 50 of the most closely trusted advisors, first of Joseph Smith and then Brigham Young when he took it over in 1845. And these books, Minute Book 1 was closed to researchers until 2016. Not even anyone at the Church History Library could see it. Only the First Presidency could see it. And people started chipping away at it till finally they decided to release it. And it is pretty shocking. You can find those minutes on, there's a website the church has put up called Joseph Smith Papers, and they have annotated them. And there are a lot of historians who've written some essays about them. And but still, there's hundreds of pages of it, and only a crazy person like Tom and me would go through all of it. But you can see it's very clear they were talking about the coast because, in fact, they were specifically saying, we are not going to the interior. No, and we don't want to go. We want the coast. We're not. In fact, we're supposed to go to a mild climate, and the California coast is every way calculated. So they're very clearly, it's clear where they're talking about. So we really have to go back and reevaluate.
Game of cooks on.
We have to reevaluate all of the interpretations that have been based before they could see all of this information, assuming that it was always going to be the Great Basin. And so when you look at the minutes, now the Council of 50, this is the first page of the Minute Book 2, which is still close to research, but our friends at the Church History Library, if you ask about a specific question, you seem to know what you're talking about, and we've worked with them long enough, they know who we are, they will answer you. So they sent us the actual minutes of that meeting. And you can see that Charles Rich is saying, yep, we have been talking about this for years and we are so thrilled to go there. And Thomas Bullock, who was Brigham Young's clerk, said, you know, the first time I heard this subject touched upon was by, guess who? Joseph Smith, who said that, Michelle? You get the gold star. Michelle wins. It was, yeah, he had his finger on this very place on the map. That's where we should go. And the reason I have very crudely highlighted these areas on the map, this is an 1848 map, is at the time, they thought that there would be a waterway that connected the Great Basin to the Gulf of California, and that would be a really wonderful place for them to settle. It was also, after the gold rush, they had at that point ruled out the Bay Area. It was too populated. So there we go. It was Joseph Smith. And here's a couple of other comments that show you how clear it is that it was Joseph Smith and why it was important. Navigation, commercial advantages, and in fact, we even have Erastus Snow saying that Joseph Smith was always opposed to the idea of seeking a location in the interior where we should be cut off from the advantages of communication by seas. So it sounds like the coast was pretty important. And here's some other reasons about, this is from the minutes as well, that they were very concerned about scarcity of provisions. They were basically trapped there without an ability to get anything. Or they also couldn't have anyone get to them. And they had very ambitious immigration plans that they really needed to make it easier to get more people to be able to join them. But interestingly, they were really afraid of being encircled, almost like having a moat around them, because there was a lot of suspicion at the time between America and the Mormons, who at that time, that was not America. The Great Basin, they considered that as not America, although by the time they got there, it was. So Lyman, Amos Lyman said something kind of interesting here. We are like a mouse in a dish. And if it should be ever necessary to get out of the dish, we need to be able to crawl out of the basin. So it's pretty clear they needed this. So at that same meeting on December 6th, 1848, Brigham Young asked the council for approval and got approval to apply for territorial status for what he called Deseret. And so here, this map, the outer boundary is what they asked for. And then the darker shaded part inside is what they actually got. And Amasa and Charles Witch were both involved right away. He sent Amasa to California in April to scope out locations, among other things, and also to get tithing from the gold rush saints. They submitted the petition for territorial status. And then they started to get this idea that they might not be getting what they wanted, and they were so desperate to get California that they created this proposal that actually President Zachary Taylor had suggested to them to apply for joint statehood with California with a 1-year mandatory dissolving clause, so that they would then get the southern part of the state after a year. And so he had Rich take that to Lyman in California, and Lyman presented it to the legislators, and they refused to even consider it. It was roundly mocked. And so at that, days later, Lyman and Rich authorized the colony. They knew they needed it, and that was the only way they were going to do it. So they sent the first settlers from the Bay Area down to settle Williams Ranch. They decided to buy it, and then they started to prepare. And meanwhile, they did find out that the federal government gave the coast to California, as they had been worried about. And so you'd think, well, maybe they gave up. But in fact, no, the plans continued absolutely just as the same, in spite of the federal decision. And in the beginning, Jefferson Hunt is very important to this whole effort, of course. I don't know if there's any Jefferson Hunt descendants on this call, but you're going to hear a lot more about him. He was involved in that decision, but then it doesn't appear that he thought he'd be part of it, because on his way back from California on January 17th, going up the southern route, he stopped in Iron County and was elected to their legislature. Then he arrived with the mail in Salt Lake, and just days later, he was recruited for the mission to San Bernardino. So, and at the end of February, the first presidency announced in an epistle that they were going to switch their immigration, their port of their receiving point from New Orleans, from the Atlantic to the Pacific. They had thought that there would be a port in San Diego that would take all new immigrants. And they also launched the new Pacific Island missionary effort headed by Parley Pratt. So they were deciding the Atlantic is too hostile to Mormons. We're going to look to the Pacific. So I think if we look at those beliefs, we can pretty much cross out the first one, that Brigham Young agreed only reluctantly, and we can actually say Brigham Young championed this vital effort. So now let's look at whether too many people went. There's no question that the sides of the company assembled to depart dismayed Brigham Young. The reason Young was even there to see it, they assembled in the southern part, and I don't know if you can tell from this map, it's sort of sideways. North is up here, but Salt Lake's over here, and these are settlements that weren't there at the time. They were planning them on the way down here, and then this is where the group was gathered down here, just south of Utah Lake, and they went down there to administer the census. So part of the territorial application process, you had to determine that you had enough population to merit it. And they were pretty sketchy at that point, whether they'd have enough. And here's 500 people about to leave the state. That's one reason he'd be angry. But the fact is, he counted them anyway, even though they were leaving. In the census, they counted 494 people, and they called it 116 houses. Those were wagons. And they also, the Mississippi Saints were there, and they counted 26 slaves that were on the slave schedule. So at that time, we know that there was a meeting, and they elected the company captains and started organizing and all of that. So the church historian, B.H. Roberts, this was in 1965. He published, this might have been the first time they actually published this document as the manuscript history of Brigham Young, or maybe they called it then comprehensive history of the church, actually. This is where that statement about only 20 people were supposed to go. And when Leo Lyman wrote in his book about his biography of Amos Lyman, he wrote in there that no record exists that the church leader had ever specified or even suggested a maximum size. And interestingly, one of the reviewers took him to task for that and said, didn't he see this comprehensive history of the church that said there were only supposed to be 20? So, and in fact, I went and asked the church historians, I said, can you show me the original that was based on? And what he showed me is this, which is a document that was created by church historians. Apostle George A. Smith was a historian at the time. And you can see this is what they wrote. And that's where this language, you can see this like little caret and it said some 20 others, you know, and all that. That was written by somebody named Jean Jacques. And you can, and so he said, look at it was supposed to be based on this other document. Here's that other one. This is the Thomas Bullock's Journal of Brigham Young's day. And it's very vanilla. He just says, yep, we looked at all this property and then there was a meeting at the fort and then we took a census and then we appointed the captains and that's about it. It was pretty, there's no anger. There's not, there were only 20, nothing like that. So how did that get into the record? I mean, that is so pervasive. How did that even go? Well, there's two ideas I have. They both involve George A. Smith, who was, by the way, Amos Lyman's cousin, and I think they were pretty competitive. So there, at the time, I mentioned that Amos Lyman was approved to go with an exploratory company in April of '49. Well, we know from a letter he wrote a little bit after that he went with a company of 20 men. So about 20 men were approved to go on the exploratory company in April, but that has nothing to do with how many were supposed to go found a whole colony. There was another thing we found that in the clerk for George A. Smith, who at this point was the president of the Iron Mission in Parowan, just south of Salt Lake. And he said at the time, I think only 30 of them were supposed to go. So this is when he saw all those people show up at Parowan, and he's like, oh my God, what are all these people doing here? I didn't think you didn't need any more than that. So it seems to have come from George A. Smith, who as historian had a lot of power over what was written. There's another widely repeated embellishment that came from B.H. Roberts. So Young, he had been feeling unwell the day before, as his actual journal entry tells you. It says, President was unwell in the morning. And so he was too ill to address the company. So Heber Kimball spoke instead. And this is what Bullock recorded. President Young feels sorrowful. He feels as though he could sit and weep like a child. He is sick. He tells the people what he ought to do. So this was transmuted into President Young is sick at the sight of so many of the saints running off to California. Well, that is not what happened, but that's what everyone thinks happened. So because Brigham Young is not stupid, clearly more than 20 men were needed for such an ambitious mission. They had just getting there. I mean, this trail, as a lot of you know, was just, you know, it was a really challenging one, and they would have needed a lot of people just to haul the wagons and take that kind of stuff. But they had to build not just a little village, they had to create a county and install a new government on it and create like major infrastructure and supply pretty much all the food to Utah. So that was a lot to do. And 20 men couldn't have done that. Just doesn't pass the reasonableness test. So why was Young so angry? And we can find I think there's pretty much two reasons. Young really wanted to keep the resources in the Great Basin. And we have this one mention, Albert King Thurber is a guy that Lyman recruited to the San Bernardino mission on the way back from California. But Albert King Thurber didn't end up going. And he wrote in his reminiscences after speaking to Brigham Young in December that Young said, Brother Lyman was sent to California to build up the church. He was not authorized to take the church with him. He was only supposed to send a few people to ensure his safety. But he was taking a great portion of the wealthiest men in the church. So, you know, the money. Bishop Crosby, who went along with him, had a lot. He had a lot of money. The Mississippi Saints had a lot of money, and they were going with Lyman. The other thing was this Iron Mission I keep mentioning was when you think about the chain of settlements, the Iron Mission was at one end of the chain and San Bernardino would be at the other. And they had a heck of a time trying to fill that mission. And they barely eked out enough people right before Lyman started recruiting for the Wagon for San Bernardino. And afterward, Brigham Young in October of 51 was just talking. He was so angry that he couldn't get anybody to go to iron, but then they had flocking to California. And he actually said at the time, I had to fight as hard as I could to keep people from going with Amos and Lyman to hell. And then I didn't want him to go to Williams Ranch. He wanted him to stay in iron, and they wouldn't. So he was just kind of angry. And I think a lot of this was also blather because he didn't want other people to go after them. He wanted to discourage it. So basically there was this the comic in the middle is an have your cake and eat it too kind of thing. So Brigham Young he had a very ambitious goal for these guys, but he wanted to not give any resources to do it. He didn't give them any money, and he didn't want to give any people either, but hey, do it, you know? So we can see that if you read the way he worded the epistle, even in September, that Charles Rich was going to commence a settlement with such of the brethren as wished to tarry there. So he was imagining it would be just Brooklyn Saints who were already there, or Mormon Battalion soldiers who had decided not to go on to Salt Lake, but instead remain in California. He thought, let's just start the colony with them. And then that was even in the letter of instruction that he wrote to Lyman and Rich, gather the saints in California around you to build up the stronghold. Okay, that was his idea. But Lyman needed Camp of Israel pioneers, let's face it. So what you're looking for to build a colony out of nothing is you need, and by the way, it was going to be a theocracy, that was very clear. You needed people accustomed to a theocracy who are willing to do it. And ideally, a close relationship with Brigham Young because he was really in charge of the theocracy. So you better buy into that. Experience living outside established civilization, close relationship with Amos who'd be leading it, that wouldn't hurt. You needed a lot of specific talents, and people with little to leave behind are more likely to go. And especially tough trail savvy men familiar with that southern route would be pretty handy. And you had that in spades in pioneers that are already in Salt Lake, and it's very paltry with the Brooklyn. They were just not the ones. In fact, none of them came for a number of years. They ended up coming, but they weren't the original colony builders. And the Mormon Battalion vets who are still there were pretty much the ones who were less thrilled with the theocracy, that they weren't so likely to go right away. A few of them did, but he really needed the Camp of Israel pioneers to build the colony. And in fact, he did try to recruit among Brooklyn Saints, but we have one example of him trying to recruit William Glover, who's like, he wanted me to go. I said no. He did, however, get some of the Brooklyn Saints to give him money. He got, that's the only money he got from the church was from the Brooklyn Saints. He got none from Brigham Young. So I think we can also knock that one off, that too many people didn't, it's not that too many people went, it's that more people from Salt Lake went than Brigham Young would have hoped, but it was not more than was needed by any means. Were they authorized to go? Let's look at that one. We can figure out who was authorized by looking at a bunch of documents. So of course the census, the 1850 census that was actually done in 1851 in Utah, was the basis for creating the roster of who was on that wagon train. But there were other documents as well that helped us either decode what some of the names were, or add a few that weren't in the original census. So there was a document called Destined for California, a list of those destined, and there's a loyalty agreement that was done later. Those two I'm going to tell you about, is in addition to a whole raft of other things, journal entries, branch records, and who was there in 1852 as well. So we'll start with the Destined for California list. This list had 81 names on it. It was a list kept by Bishop Crosby, who was the bishop in the Amasa survey, which is where a lot of the Lyman's loyal people were. And more than a third of them didn't actually end up going. They intended to go and didn't. And we know that Brigham Young picked off a few of them. At least 6 of Lyman's recruits were offered responsible positions if they would remain. So we had them called to settle some of those Utah Lake settlements. They were going to be the mayor or the bishop or something. And then Dr. Andrews was called to be the Nauvoo Legion doctor. Joseph Kane to be the postmaster. So he talked some people out of going. There were others too. There could have been some people who actually only originally signed up to get out of going to the Iron Mission. And that idea came from, again, Alex King Thurber, who said people wanted him to go. He didn't want to. And Lyman said, if anyone said anything about it, say that he wanted me to go with him. So that could have been one reason that people were on the list. So when you look at all who was on it, you can see most, but not all, on that Lyman and Rich train were bound for the colony. 82% were bound for the colony and intended to be part of the church. There were another 27 people who were LDS, but were not really intending to be part of that whole theocracy business. And they were some of the people that Brigham Young would have been not so thrilled to see there. There were people going to the Iron Mission. There were people going to the Pacific Island Mission. This was the launch of it, Parley Pratt and his first group of missionaries. And then there were 25 men who I can't find any Mormon affiliation with, that we do find in the Gold Country later. So they were the Teamsters that they needed to haul the stuff and, you know, all that. So even though the census originally said, I think it said 487 or whatever, there were 520 people that ended up showing up at Parowan when they got there. And by the way, the only men found in the gold fields in 1852 were the Teamsters. The Lyman and Rich colonists had way too much to do to be trying to do that. That was not on their mind. Another really odd thing about what that weird speech that Kimball gave on March 23rd at Payson was, don't bring your family members with you. Don't deny the faith before you get to the coast. If I was going, I would say to all my family, stay in the old beehive till I go and do what I wanted to do. So this is also the kind, they didn't want the families to go with the Iron Mission either. They said they wanted them to leave their families for a year or two, and they wouldn't do it. So they had to ease that restriction in order to get anybody to go to the Iron Mission. But that's what they wanted. There was also a stated settlement policy that had been used. It was instituted right before the main Camp of Israel, the Exodus, the law of adoption. And I don't know if you all are familiar with that, but they put that out there. They had people they could be adopted to one of the general authorities that would be, they would pledge to support them in this life and to be part of their heavenly life, the heavenly community in heaven kind of thing. And so this was a way of creating tighter bonds, keeping people unified, keeping the flock together, preventing it from scattering, discouraging it from scattering. So they wanted you to travel in your family groups. And as one of the Lyman and Rich train members, who was one of Amos's folks, William Karchner, wrote, we were to farm as we had traveled. So you were supposed to be in these tens and these hundreds, and then you were supposed to settle there. And that's what they did. Amos is what Leo Lyman dubbed the semi-permanent traveling company. They settled near him, east of Salt Lake, on the Amos survey, which is present-day Cottonwood, Holiday, Mill Creek areas. And so a lot of the people that went on the train were from the Amos survey. And so, you know, this idea that you can go start a colony but not have families seems pretty silly. You need families. The women are important too, kids too. So this chart, what this is intended to show is a typical, the authorized men are blue. And so if you look at the Iron Mission all the way to the right, you see the blue is by far the most dominant. The green are the women, the children, and we've added in the enslaved in this case. So you could see that it was mostly the authorized men. The San Bernardino colonists, look at how many were the family members. Those families were big, and guess why? Polygamy was one reason. Several men brought many wives and a lot of kids. And the other reason was, of course, the law of adoption. And so Lyman's biological, legal, adoptive family members and their wives, children, in-laws, and traveling siblings accounted for somewhere between 200 and 250 people out of the whole train. That's a lot, okay? But that's part of what they said. You're supposed to stay together, so it's not surprising. And Lyman was particularly successful with this law of adoption. He said, when it comes to the game of kingdom, I can hold my own with any of them. So he was like the Pied Piper. He was charismatic, and you know, people wanted to follow him, and they did. So this is my an attempt to show you that in the center were the people that we've just been talking about. They were also these volunteer families that we cannot find were authorized. There were only 4 of them that ended up joining the church and being productive members. But there are these hitchhiker families. There were 5 of them who had Mormon ties for sure and were not part of the church. So they were the ones that that Amasa was probably not Amasa, that Brigham Young was probably really yelling at. And then there's this idea of trailing family heads that I meant to point that out on this other one. This brown slice here is this idea of trailing men. So that's where the adult sons of the authorized or recruited men, or the brother-in-law, or the uncle, or whatever, these trailing men that came along were not. He wasn't expecting to see more of the periphery of the relatives that as came. But what we do see when you look at the census, that the Lyman and Rich colonists possessed the skills, both the practical skills and the leadership skills you needed to join a colony, to build a colony. It's no surprise. Lyman did an amazing job recruiting. There were look at all the building trades there, farmers, a lot of farmers, general laborers, and then a schoolmaster, all this stuff. Lot of real experienced leaders and trailblazers. What's the most interesting to me is that of all of those bound for the colony, 430, 314 of them, or 3/4, had been in Nauvoo. These were the colony builders. And even some of the Mississippi Saints had first been in Nauvoo and helped build the temple and settled there first before going on the trek. There were only 26 people, and I think that was 4 or 5 families that joined the church after the Nauvoo era. So that went to the colony. So that is, I think, pretty interesting. All right, so let's look at the third one then, that most were unauthorized. I don't think we can say that. There was certainly some who were unauthorized, but most were definitely authorized or related to an authorized person. So the last one about the apostate narrative is, were they disloyal? Or were they really going to be willing to pledge? Well, so they were required to pledge to obey a theocracy before they went. And this idea arose at Payson, as they were ranting and raving about how many people were there. They came up with this idea of requiring them to make a loyalty pledge. And here's what this transcription above. The following is a report of those who gave their names as being subject to the Council of Elders Lyman and Rich in relation to their settlements and operations. They are the ones that are going to be connected. And what the idea was that they were to obey the council of the church over the rule of US law. They were supposed to, that you had to agree that that was more important than US law. And we know this from James A. Rollins, indicates that this then satisfied Young and Kimball that, okay, if you do that, we're okay with you going. And so Lyman and Rich talk about this. This happened in Payson, and which was one of their last stop before they left the settled area. And so Rich said that 127 names were given, and Amasa said that 111 men said that they would. Well, that's interesting. And there's another thing interesting about it was that this was usually when people were asked to vote in the church, they were packed on rows, seated closely together, where the heads of the church were on a pedestal looking down and could see everybody, and you really couldn't. It was unanimous. Everything was always unanimous. But in this case, they were in wagons, and they were standing, they were intermingled with people who weren't asked to make the pledge because they were going on a Pacific Island mission, or they were also, the Paragon colonists were intermingled with them because they were invited to the same meeting. So it would have been easy to just not answer. So how loyal were they? Historian interpretations vastly differed. So Leonard Arrington, who wrote a bio of Rich, used Rich's account and concluded that insubordination was widespread. He took Rich's number of 127. He compared it with the 437 on the census, assumed that they were all eligible, and said only 29% agreed. Well, of course, 437 people included all those women and children and people who weren't going to the colony. And so that was a way undercount. Leo Lyman, using Amis's version, said the insubordination was minuscule. He assumed that all 111 agreed, and he knew the names he was looking for, and he found 4 people that he appears that he found 4 names. There were 4 men he was looking for that weren't on there. So he thought, well, maybe 115 were eligible. So, but that's 97%. That's pretty darn good. So it's minuscule. The answer is actually in between. There were 138 men eligible, 111 names on the list, but 10 of them were marked as out of favor. So the real answer, did I do the, yeah, this is, so these marked out of favor, 15 had markings that were different. 5 of them were enslaved. So 5 of the slaves on the Lyman and Rich wagon train were actually also church members. And that was news that I shared with the folks that are studying all that. In any case, 10 of them were marked as out of favor. And so what you look at, this is a chart I did to show that there is a real difference in who signed the pledge and who didn't. Among the recruited and the people I think were probably recruited, it was 90%. And so there were 60 eligible males that were definitely recruited, and another 11 I think probably were. That's pretty good. So they're over here. That is definitely, I'd say, minuscule. But at the other end, we have the group of trailing adult sons. These are the, 22-year-olds or whatever, or the son-in-laws who went along because the wife wanted to go with the parents, but he wasn't so hot on it, but he went anyway. So those guys were actually, the trailing heads were 66%. That's not that bad considering. The trailing sons, these are the young men. These are like the 18-year-olds that were, they were less loyal than anyone. And so even less loyal than the volunteer group. So 62% of the people who weren't recruited went ahead and agreed. And even some of the, well, anyway, so here's what you can see is that the actual answer depended, Leo was right and Leonard Arrington was right. It depended, but most people, you'd have to say they were pretty loyal. So now that's the last of the apostate narrative. Most, but not all, were loyal and expected to work hard and sacrifice. So there's just one more question that remains. Did Brigham Young consider the colony a failure? And if you look at one of their main goals being to create this corridor, to bring essential new supplies in and new converts in, you have to say mission accomplished. And that has been long recognized by some very less historians who haven't really been as well read as they should be. People aren't reading them as much as they should, but Andrew Love Neff really understood this, that even then, even though the government didn't give them the land that they wanted, this is the political boundary. They didn't get the political boundary they wanted, but they got the actual influence regardless. It didn't matter. They had what they wanted. Young did not cease his efforts to control a corridor to the coast till he had accomplished his goal. Here's another couple of books. This one by Creer was also good. And the Lyman and Rich pioneers were so instrumental in fulfilling this vision. So that establishing the corridor used to transport mail, supplies, and people. And Jefferson Hunt held the contract for the mail service, and several of the other Lyman and Rich wagon train members were the couriers on that. The Seeley brothers had the Mormon owned mills. David Frederick managed the one for Lyman for a long time. The agricultural support, this one is pretty interesting. They had 1,300 acres in production. Their agricultural production of the San Bernardino colonists exceeded that of Santa Barbara, Los Angeles, and San Diego fields combined. They were darn good at this, and a lot of that went straight up to Utah. And then they were very successful as the host of this Pacific Island mission. The Australia mission, they got 175 converts in 5 ships in just a few years that was operating. And then this, I think, is even more interesting. Jefferson Hunt continued the quest to have the political boundary for Deseret be as include the coast all the way through to 1858 into 1857. So when he started, right when they got there, he attended a convention to divide California. They were arguing. So there was a group of people that wanted Southern California to be a slave state. They knew Northern California was going to be free. They wanted Southern to be a slave state. They wanted to split the state. And the Mormons collaborated with them because their idea was then we could annex to Utah and the whole thing would work. So they worked on that the entire time. Jefferson Hunt was elected assemblyman in 1852. In 1853, of course, he got this county carved out of LA County, which gave them control. They got their theocracy legally. It was actually, they got exceptions to the way every other county was run, and they were able to run it as a theocracy legally, which is amazing. And then in 1855, Jefferson Hunt introduced a bill to create a new state out of Southern California, and that didn't work. But in 1857, in January, he introduced a joint resolution to perhaps again consider dividing the state. And by this point, the issue was that the moment had passed. They refused. They tabled it. And guess who left his position after that? He resigned. He didn't stand for re-election, and a non-Mormon, Isaac Smith, was chosen to replace him in that fall. I think he was chosen in August before the recall. So once they knew that they couldn't get it, they didn't need it anymore. And that Jefferson Hunt, that failed in January, and in February is when Brigham Young sent a letter to Lyman and Rich saying, "I want you back. We're gonna pull you out." So clearly, this was a very big part of what they were trying to do down there. So in conclusion, I think we can put that fifth one to rest too. That Brigham Young considered the colony a failure. The colony in San Bernardino, we have to agree, allowed for the fulfillment of Joseph Smith's original vision to have a Zion that stretched to the Pacific. He made it work, and you got to give him credit. So there you have it. I started with a picture of Sue. I'm ending with a picture of Nick Cataldo. This is up on what do you call this? The something back? What Nick?
They call it the hogback.
The hogback.
Basically, it's a very narrow trail, and this is where the Mormon families lowered their wagons. They're following the Salt Lake Road that was going to go through, following the old Spanish Trail through East Cajon Canyon. While they were traveling, prior to, they found out about a new route formed by William Sanford through West Cajon Valley. And if you're familiar with go northbound on Interstate 15, and then make a left or go, I guess it would be eastbound on 138, you'll be going into West Cajon Valley. And at one point, that's where the Sanford Road made a wide bend through Baldy Mesa and came down this narrow ridge. And David Cheeseman, who traveled along that route in 1850, a year prior to the Mormons coming out, mentioned that at one point that hogback was so narrow that they couldn't get all the wheels on the wagons on the road at the same time. So they had to take some of the wheels off. They had to unhitch the oxen. They had to lower the wagons. So it was quite an ordeal.
It's just crazy to imagine that, isn't it?
Yeah. So just last week, Mark Landis and Gary Smith and I hiked it. Now, I'd been there about 2 or 3 times previous to that, and it was quite fun.
Kind of amazing. So anyway, I'm just curious if anyone has any questions I can answer, or
Kristine, there have been a few questions in the chat, and want to shout out. Is it Michelle Lovato? I see your face, and tell us about your daughter who's working with Sue Payne.
All I really know is that it was part of a class that she took last semester, and she had gone down there. She borrowed my scanner, and she came home with notebooks and notebooks and notebooks of stuff that she was supposed to scan in as part of a class. And then she gave me my scanner back and went and got a bigger one. That's about all I know.
Well, it's been so exciting. Sue and I went and met with Matthew Bowman at Claremont when was that now, Sue? A couple of years ago, I guess. Seems like time flies. And he was very interested in getting his students involved in helping out the library. And I know it's been a huge boon both ways. It's been exciting.
Oh, and you know, my daughter came home and she told me all these stories, and she knows that I'm into the history of Apple Valley. So
Oh,
she found little tidbits here and there, and Apple
that's
Valley
exciting.
this, and
well, my mom grew up in that area. She went to Apple Valley High School and all that. Yeah. Anyway, what questions do we have, Tom?
Another question relates to what was the Brooklyn? And I've given the basic fact that the Brooklyn was a ship of saints that left the East Coast and arrived at Yerba Buena or San Francisco in 1846.
Yeah.
But maybe, Kristine, you'd like to talk about their expectations of
yeah.
Mormons
Okay.
settled.
So back when in 1845, when you saw those quotes that from the Council of 50, where they had decided we're going to go to California. We're going to actually, that's where we're going to go. That was, they made a vote in August to definitely do that. And they were going to, Brigham Young was going to be the next president of California. And it's a very interesting thing. And then they added in the idea of the Great Basin on September 9th as a way station. And at that point, so that was September 9th. And then on September 15th, I think, is when Brigham Young asked Samuel Brennan, who was in the New York mission, to get a ship and bring all the East Coast saints to San Francisco to create the colony that would accept all of they'd be the advanced company. They would get there and plant crops, and so that when the whole rest of the immigration from Illinois, they'd meet them there. So that was the original plan, and he did. So I forget how many people were on that ship. I could pull that, but anyway, that they were the first. They arrived just 3 weeks after the Bear Flag Revolution. So when they got there, they thought they were going to claim it. They had a Mormon flag. They thought they were going to claim it for Mormons, and it was already America 3 weeks earlier. So just missed it. The same with the Mormon Battalion was sent. They were authorized in July of 46 to go to California, and they thought that they would, it would be, they would get there and take over. And of course, by the time they got there, the Treaty of Hidalgo had already been signed, and it was America. So they, a day late and a dollar short. So,
Kristine, how many of the Mormon Battalion veterans stayed in California as colonists, and how many returned to Salt Lake?
Oh, okay. Well, that's actually another thing that Tom and I have been working on outside of that's the project we just finished before switching gears to do this presentation. So the Mormon Battalion was divided midway through their service, and some of them got sent to Pueblo and Colorado, and so they went from there to the Great Basin. The other half, well, more of them, that was 158 of them, 320 of them or so went on to California. And so after their service got over, a good number of them, most of them, but not all, headed north, and they were in two groups. One was going to go right to meet the camp of Israel back. They were going to go back east. And the other one decided, we're just going to stay around here. And so, so the numbers, it depends on when you say how many went where, when. You'd have to look at the battalion in segments, and that's a whole nother presentation that in fact we will be giving, and I will invite you all to. So it's too complicated to answer here, but and I can't do it justice without the numbers in front of me, but there were segments. There were the strong loyalists, and there were quite a few of those, but there were also the ones who sort of got used to being independent and weren't so thrilled about, they didn't really relish the idea of going back. They were also promised California, and it was a bit of a bait and switch. It's like, oh, wait, did I say California? You're going to come to the Great Basin. And they weren't so excited about that either. So, Marilyn.
May I say something?
Yes.
112 of the battalion, after they were mustered out in Los Angeles on July of 1847, went north and worked for Sutter. And of those, there were 6 of them that went out and helped to build the sawmill for Marshall. And they were there that had discovered a little bit of gold and showed it to Marshall. And he went out the next day and said, yep, boys, I found it. Nothing, like it's gold. So there was a great, huge group, 112, that went north. And then they ended up going back to the Salt Lake Valley. Their families still weren't there. And then they went on back to to the plains where their families were still waiting, and then walked again back to Salt Lake. So they had walked from Nauvoo all the way through to San Diego, to LA, up to San Francisco, Sacramento, over the Sierras, and back all the way where they started.
It's crazy, isn't it? Some of those guys, we've got a big spreadsheet where we tracked all of them. There were 496 men in the battalion, and we've tracked all of them over all the time to see where they all ended up. And I mean, man, those guys got around. It's astonishing.
Kristine, there's been a question, were the Swarthouse members of the LDS Church?
Okay.
There's specifically related to the markings on the April agreement.
Yeah.
And then Amy has answered some other information about that family, but maybe you want to talk a little bit about what those markings meant relation to standing.
Okay. And I'm interested in the Swartouts too. My family ended up being cattle ranchers in Big Bear, and of course, the Swartouts were cattle ranchers too. So they were most of the families, it turns out, that I grew up knowing their names had been Mormon, and I didn't know it at the time. But anyway, so the Swartouts, there was a large interrelated family. So Sidney Tanner, who was a Lyman adoptee, there was the Tanners, the Swartouts, and what was the other one? Shepherds. It's Samuel Shepherd. And so then there's Marcus Shepherd. Anyway, there's those three families were all very interrelated. So the Swartouts and the Shepherds, some were definitely church loyalists. And it appears that the three Swartout brothers that were on the Lyman and Rich train were less, gung-ho, shall we say. Whether they ever joined or not, I imagine they probably did when they were younger. I think most of them were probably part of it at some point. But and I think, and Nathan, not Nathan, who was the one that married? He got married during right when they got to Sycamore Grove. He married. Shoot, now I can't remember off the top of my head. Anyway, so I think he probably was pretty. They interacted with the churches. They were part of the community.
Kristine, someone asks, what proportion of the colonists obeyed the recall?
Yeah. Okay. That is interesting. And that's, in fact, I even had a slide. Let's see. Did I? Oh, no, I didn't. Anyway, the whole thing about why did he close the colony? It's a whole nother presentation, really. But so how many obeyed? How many of the Lyman and Rich train or of the colonists?
Of the Lyman and Rich train.
So if you'd have to look again, remember how I had the segments of who were the authorized versus the volunteers versus the escapees, let's say. So it's not going to be surprising to you to know that it aligned very closely to that. And I can do a chart on that. I didn't do it yet, but I came up with, I was thinking about that. In fact, in a prior session, who were we just talking about? With Marianne, we just gave this as a travel run yesterday and had the idea of correlating that. So the authorized men, almost all of them obeyed. The adult sons, much less so. It was very similar to what you would expect. There were only a few people, and very few of the volunteers obeyed the recall. Definitely not the escapees. A few of the authorized got disillusioned during the colony years, but for the most part, it stayed very consistent.
Kristine, Dixie has an interesting question. She wants a show of hands, and maybe Kristine, you can arrange to see everybody's faces so people can raise their hands.
Well, I can stop sharing my screen actually.
On this presentation, how many are descendants of pioneers on the Lyman and Rich wagon train?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, and I myself am related distantly to, so Madison Welsh, who was a Mormon battalion member, his he ended up marrying a daughter of Gasham Case. So their children are related to me by marriage, I guess. So yeah, I'm curious. Anyone here related to someone on the Lyman and Rich train? So we've got Fred and Barb. Who are you related to? And you can go ahead and unmute.
Yeah, you need to unmute yourself.
There you go.
Yeah, the Tanner family.
The Tanners. Awesome. Oh yeah, cool. Who else? Anyone else? Let's see if I got two screens. Okay, Colin Birch.
I am Charles C. Rich is my third great grandpa.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome. Well, that's cool. Who else? Anyone else?
This is Dixie.
Uh-huh.
I have Taylor's, Benson's, and Jaegers.
Oh yeah, so you got the Haskell train as well. So I don't know if you know about that, but there was the next largest train that came was 1854, and Tom and I have dubbed it the Haskell train because Mormon Battalion veteran, what's his name? Charles Haskell?
George
Haskell
Haskell
was the leader of that, and a lot of folks came in that one. Cool. And Dan Kelty.
Yeah, my sister-in-law's relatives came in 53. They were not part of the original group, but the Bemis, Jerusalem Bemis came.
That was Haskell too. Yeah.
And I've been working with you folks on identifying the Mormon battalion who stayed in San Bernardino, and I have a lot more than 18. And also I'm with the Community of Christ, and we're having a conference at St. George next fall.
Yeah.
And I want you to bring this presentation, so contact them.
Well, I was already asked to present at it actually, but I didn't know if it was still going. So yeah, that'd be cool.
As far as we know, it's going.
Cool.
If not, we'll do something with Zoom.
I'd be happy to give it. That'd be great. I also have a presentation on the RLDS in San Bernardino, which is a whole nother talk that's kind of fun too. There's a whole nother set of myths. There's all kinds of myths about what went on during the colony years, and then I will probably spend the rest of my life studying this and writing about it. It's just so rich and so fun.
Yeah, I just started working on the El Monte factions that after they dissolved San Bernardino,
El Monte.
Renegades went to El Monte to stay.
We'll have to talk more about that.
And the Clemensons.
Yeah. And one of the families on the Lyman and Rich train went to settle Del Monte. So yeah, they were one of the escapees, I'd say. Did someone else have a question? I think I heard.
Kristine, several folks are expressing appreciation, very educational, says Christopher, and enlightening, great slides and informative.
Oh, great.
A broader question, and Anna Belford says to everyone, and maybe you'll want to ask her a question, Kristine. Her question is general. The question is, so what is the Mormon legacy in San Bernardino?
Aha. That is a good question. I'm curious about what those of you who are there now. Thank you, Anna. And I'm curious about what some of you think that it is. And I think the answer would be different depending on if you ask somebody in Utah versus if you ask somebody in San Bernardino.
I meant, is that legacy prevalent among the Mormons, and what happened to the Williams Rancho and I mean, that's and they established that huge county.
Yeah. So they ended up not buying the Williams Rancho. So that's another story. But so when you say what was the legacy, it depends on what you mean. That the San Bernardino was so important to the early years of California statehood, and they established so many parts of it that the legacy, but I just don't think it's acknowledged. So when you ask what is the legacy, what is the real legacy versus what's acknowledged, those are two different questions. I mean, if you look at an earlier map, in fact, I think the map I have showing behind me, one of the reasons I love it, I don't know if you can see it, but it's a map of California that actually has San Bernardino on it, because it was important and it was big, and and now you won't even necessarily find it called out. So the legacy is well under, it's been minimized, and I can't have that, you know. That's what motivates me. Marilyn, yes.
I might have that same map. Does it show Salt Lake as an inset? And then all of California?
It does. It is that
Okay,
map.
I got the same one. It's in 1860. And the reason I believe that it was created in 1860 is, first of all, the San Francisco Bay Area, the Brooklyn Saints that were there started the commercial agriculture industry. So that was a huge, besides
in New Hope, yeah,
becoming a major impact. And then all of a sudden, San Bernardino then becomes with the corridor that Jefferson Hunt is blazing the trail there, and the wagons that are coming, they start agriculture. So I kind of agree with Leo that San Bernardino becomes a major economic hub of the Southwest with San Francisco and Salt Lake. Definitely. So that map you have, to me, is extremely meaningful, that it shows the three main Upper California area economic centers.
Well, and then when you get to the railroads coming, and that's where my other line, so my Hitchcock line intersects with the Poppet line, and that's when my great-grandfather William Hitchcock came from Ohio to San Bernardino right after the railway went through and had a depot in San Bernardino. And so, and to read in it, that the project I did, I met Tom during, I did a course at University of Washington on, what was that called? Just genealogy and family history, I guess. Mm-hmm. And one of the assignments was to read all the newspapers, pick an ancestor in a point in time and place, and read newspapers from that time. So I read 3 months worth of newspapers. I happened to pick a time when the editor of the Boardman, Ohio, was in San Bernardino. I just happened to pick up, and he wrote columns every week about how amazing San Bernardino was. And it was those columns clearly that got my great-grandfather to move there when he was 22 years old and become, embedded in that community and cattle rancher and all that. And so at the time, I mean, for a number of years, and you must know this, it was a paradise, it was really an amazing place. And you just don't find that referenced in history at all anymore. And it just is sad. Yes.
Yeah. I'm not a descendant of the LDS Church or the pioneers that came through, but the importance as a historian and a history enthusiast, the significance of the Mormons coming out here is just,
it can't be overstated.
I mean, you think about when they came out, initially they were going to Rancho del Chino, the Chino Ranch, and then through, there's another long story behind that, but because Isaac Williams did not want to sell his ranch, and then they came out.
Yeah, what happened is that the price of beef went up so high because of the gold rush that it ended up, he didn't think that would be such a smart idea after all to sell. Right. So yeah.
But by coming out and settling in what is now the city of San Bernardino, you think about they built a road up the mountains up to what's now Crestline. That was a logging road. They started logging up in the mountains.
I know.
They laid the streets out of San Bernardino. First.
Yeah, they laid out baseline.
Baseline, sure, right? Well, that was Colonel Washington's site. There was a baseline survey line.
Yeah, in fact, I have a piece that I wrote that's published in the Utah Historical Quarterly online about Henry Sherwood, and his work surveying San Bernardino. So I should find, maybe Tom, you can find a link to that and put it in the chat. Do you think you can?
I'm sorry, which link is that?
It's the one, if you look up Henry Sherwood, Master of Surveyor, I think you should be able to find it pretty easily. So
baseline was very important because a lot of streets were laid out true north and south and east and west, because baseline was a fundamental marker for all the streets in early San Bernardino.
All of Southern California. It was even more important than that. It was it was amazing. I mean, it's shocking to me that people don't know this, because I mean, I grew up in California all through college, and I didn't know anything about anything a Mormon had done to California history. I knew nothing.
No, when you drive, if you drive eastbound on Baseline, if you're in San Bernardino, especially, or even beyond that, look directly east and you're direct in line with the top of Mount San Bernardino.
Yeah, exactly. That's what they,
There was
the
a Henry Sherwood, who was a surveyor.
yeah.
I mean, no, not Sherwood, Washington. There was a Henry Washington.
That he was with
Yeah.
the federal government.
Right.
And then Henry Sherwood came out and
That's
laid
right.
everything out based
Washington
on.
did the Baseline, and they had a marker down at the top of Mount San Bernardino,
Right.
and they used other. It's amazing how they did their configuration of how they laid out the street, but that's where it is.
The grid for San Bernardino is based on Salt Lake City's, which is based on Independence, Missouri's original Joseph Smith plan.
Yes, it is. And that's all mentioned in my article too. I hope you can find that, Tom. Marilyn?
I have to put in my favorite part of the legacy. We kind of don't talk about the Black pioneers that were there.
Sure.
And I've done a lot more research with that. I've got to speak one year. I lost her, but great granddaughter of Biddy Mason.
Oh yeah.
And even the Indians, there was a few problems, but I mean, they were true friends. The colony would have their festivals, and they would have part of the Rancho families. They'd all be seated as honored guests. And of course, I gotta say, I can't say it's my favorite group, but it's just, I have to smile of the 10 Jewish merchants.
Oh yeah.
Those, I just love their histories. And so I just think probably the legacy at the time was that, as Leo has termed it, is the true spirit of community.
Definitely.
That's the thing that our reenactors still go all over California. As soon as they open those schools, well, they're going back in their pioneer outfits and distributing our little brown brochures that talk about that true spirit of community.
Are the brochures similar to the article that you wrote in the Edison?
Yes, they're more for schools. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's excellent. That's a foundational article. Yeah.
Kristine, Bill wants to see the map behind you, and maybe Sue has similar maps, not just of Utah and California, but of San Bernardino.
So just wants to see like closer up?
Yeah.
Okay.
The one on the far right, I think.
This one?
Yeah. Or
this one?
Well, that's California. I think the one that includes mostly Utah.
Oh, the other one. Okay.
I took out the video. I should take out the all.
Put this back up. And are there any other questions while I'm doing that?
I think the San Bernardino Estancia needs to be remarked because that was fixed up by the Latter-day Saints when they were living.
Yeah. Can you see this one? I don't know what part you want to look at.
Yeah, I was more interested in seeing the part where it shows San Bernardino.
Oh,
because
yeah.
that was the area I was interested in.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. What I can do, and I can take a picture of it and send it out, afterward if you like.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah, I've really enjoyed the maps you're showing. That really gives me an idea of the travel.
Do we have a record of who's on this call to have, like, if people want to follow up, or in fact, if you wanted me to send you anything or whatever, you could just email me, and
that might be the best thing.
Why don't I put my email in the chat?
And Kristine, you've said you've digitized so many things. You have this file. Is it going to be out the California room in a digital file format?
Well,
how is it going to be shared? Because that's an incredible amount of information.
Yeah. Okay. So let me answer that. It's a great question. First, let me put this in. Okay. So yeah, if you have a question, or if you put your email link in this, then Tom can collect them and we can have a little group list of people that want, follow-up things sent to you if you want to. I'd love to have a little group of people interested in what I'm doing. That'd be fantastic. Okay, so the question is the data sets that we have. I've been working for a number of years with Sue and who else, with Joe Fondy, and we had Richard, and I forget who all was working with us on that, but trying to find a way to get my data sets onto the San Bernardino website. And then we even started talking about it with to Matthew Bowman at Claremont. And I don't think we've really solved it because we don't have, I mean, I don't have the resources to be a webmaster or anything like that. I can't maintain it. And someone, we haven't solved the question.
You know, Cal State San Bernardino, I had a meeting with them
Oh.
many years ago, and we were trying to, they were thinking of hosting something. So you might check with them. I know there's the archivist there.
Oh my, okay, we need to talk to them.
Yeah,
because
try them because they did have an interest.
we have, what I did do, I had a website that I created as a just a proof of concept that I actually demoed when I presented to the Mormon History Association in Boise several years ago, that it showed you what could be done. And some of the rosters, you know, what we don't have yet, I have to manually cross sort things because I don't have a database. I have Excel, right? And so to be able to put this into an actual database would be incredible. It would be incredible because these spreadsheets are really big and can be cumbersome to go through. And so I would love nothing more than that, but I don't have the resources to do
Can I
it.
interrupt for just a sec?
Yes, Sue.
For one thing, I don't know how to use my chat. I've been trying to respond to some people and I don't know if I've sent my response or not, but
So when you look at the two, there's a drop-down box and you can say to everyone or to the person you want. Did
I
you
see
put
that.
So
But let me address the question on the California room, having the database. I would love to have that. Our problem in the California room is that the city of San Bernardino is the webmaster for the library website. And we probably will not be able to get the cooperation of adding what you're asking for on the database, at least not at present. Downstream, hopefully, when everybody is up and running full steam again, maybe.
we tried this for a long time.
Some of Kristine's work, you know, if I know that it's a mess to try to print everything, but if we could have some of that at least digitally available in the California room.
You know what we could do? I'm going to show you a notebook we have. I'm going to show you. This is what.
And she has great notebooks. I'd love to have them. I just would love to have people to come back to the California room.
Yeah. So I
Yes.
full of notebooks, and this one is San Bernardino Colony. So what I was going to say is that this is how right now we bring this with us wherever we go. Is like we've got a tab for the tithing records or for the 1852 census or San Bernardino leaders or who obeyed the recall or, you know, all these things. It's just, here's, you know, book A. It's just hard. I mean, I need a librarian. I need somebody to do it. It can't be me because I'm too busy writing and speaking and doing whatever. And so if anyone has a way to help with this, do let us know because getting this information out is important. What Tom and I have been working on recently is about the Mormon Battalion, and we have our data sets are now going to be are actually now up and running actually on the Mormon Battalion's new website, the association's website. And I'm also working with the church history department to get the Lyman and Rich Wagon train into the MPOT, the Mormon Overland Trails database. So I'm working with
Tell me who you're working with there, please.
Kevin Nielsen.
Okay.
So I just had a meeting with him recently. I did invite him to this. He saw the last presentation I did was about how we did the data sets for the Mormon Battalion. And it's a very similar thing that we did for the Lyman and Rich train. And I have them for the Mississippi Company as well, and Brooklyn and all kinds of things. So to us, what we're trying to do is just, I feel like I know all of these people. It's like history by starting from a people and making it bigger, as opposed to, there's so many nuances of it. You can't just say, this is what happened, this one thing that's a generalized statement. A lot of things happened. And so trying to get it detailed is where you get all the interesting, the puzzles. It's solving puzzles and it's really fun.
Hey, another legacy of the Mormons in San Bernardino is Ward Kimball. The descendant of Heber Kimball donated his train collection to the Paris Museum of Railroads. He was a wonderful person for the Scouts in Temple City, because he had his trains right there inside Temple City. He was the artist for Walt Disney.
Well, that's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool. Okay, we just got a fun chat from somebody that just is a number and I don't know who that is. Oh, is that whoever 19514 is?
Yes, it's me.
Barbara.
That's oh, so there's no name, we don't know. Good. Hi, Barbara. Good to see you.
Hi.
So what other
I'm
questions?
recognizing a lot of faces here.
Yeah, and Amy, it's so great to have you here. I've been working with Amy on the Mississippi Saints and especially the enslaved portion of the train. And she helped me solve some puzzles, and I've been sharing with her some things that I know about the colony. And it's been a really great collaboration. It's so great to see Amy here, although I see just your picture, not your face, but it's good to have you here.
Hey, Kristine, this is Mark Landis.
Yes. Great. Ah, there you are.
The image that you showed of Nick and I on the ridge on the hogback coming down that the wagon train took.
Yeah.
If anybody's interested, I have a few photos that I can share here. We just did that trip about 2 weeks ago, and I have a few photos that if I can share my screen, we could take a quick look at those.
That could be fun. What I want to do also before we lose any people, I don't know how long people can stay, but I want to know what next presentation you would want me to give if I were to give another one, which I'm happy to do. I could give so many different options, but what would be the most interesting? Or can you tell Tom from the questions what they want to know?
Well, I think the recall is how did it end? How did the colony end? I see that question line. And then there's interest in Mormon Battalion. There's interest in the survey and the land, some genealogy vis-a-vis Swarthouse. So there is some broad interest.
I could see doing something on the property, because using the records at the archives compared with the church records of who purchased property directly from Lyman and Rich, which aren't held in the archives because those were like internal transactions basically. So those records helped us in so many ways plot the story of the colony, and that could be an interesting one if that could be.
I would love to have us cover some of the RLDS.
Oh yeah, that would be a fun one too.
I still find that fascinating that even today when I talk to Mormons, they feel so entirely disenfranchised.
Yeah, I would love,
I mean, even today.
You know what I want to show, actually, I'm going to share again because I want to show the RLDS slides that I have that I put in my appendix just because, let's see if I can get there. So I was thinking about, oh, we can do a little poll here too. Why did Brigham Young close the colony? And I ruled out that it was a failure because we already all know that that's not the answer. But I wonder if people want to tell me what they think the reason was of any of these things. You can unmute and say what you think. Or
well, I'd say Mountain Meadows Massacre was part of the reason.
What do others think?
Well,
or do you know?
You know,
so all right, well, that's just something we could, I'm not going to give you the answer. I'm just going to show you the question. Okay, this was another question. This was a myth that so I was working closely for a number of years with a historian named Polly Aird. I don't know if any of you know her. And she was one of the first things she said to me when we were talking about the colony was, I said something about Mormons after the recall, and she said, well, there were no Mormons left in San Bernardino after the recall. Well, those famous last words, we had that taped up on our office wall to tease Polly about, because in fact, San Bernardino was the largest RLDS branch in 1871 anywhere. And they were larger, the branch was larger than any of the Midwestern branches by far. And oops, I thought I had another one where I showed, Shoot, I had one where it just shows that it was a magnet. It's actually wasn't what San Bernardino was a magnet for Josephites. Because if you remember, Joseph Smith is the one that had said, we are going to California. And it was Brigham Young that shifted it. And a lot of people waited until Brigham Young cut ties with the colony. And then they started flooding in to San Bernardino. And so many people that I saw their names from a lot of things that went on in Nauvoo, they show up in the colony. In fact, a lot of them that had gone to the what was that guy's name that did the thing in Texas? Why is it escaping me at the moment?
Lyman White.
Lyman White. A lot of Whiteites came and joined the RLDS. It was San Bernardino wasn't. If you were a Josephite, you thought you were Mormon, and there were more Mormons in San Bernardino than anywhere else. But it's just that Utah didn't recognize that. So, and they do now more. The Mormon History Association is acknowledging that they encompass not just the RLDS is part of their history. So yeah, but that'd be a fun one to show too.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
Thank you. So
Okay.
what else I'm seeing? I've just had a chance to look through the chat stream a little bit. Someone said would love to hear more about the Australia emigres on the Brooklyn. And so that was Chloe. Is Chloe still here? And I can show you my spreadsheet if you want. I'm happy to do that. Share screen. And I want to show this one. Okay. So can you see this? This is my Australian ships spreadsheet. Do you see it?
No.
No.
Oh, now I can see it.
List
Yes.
now.
Okay. So this is Australian ships, and I can look up by surname. You want me to look up the Hawkers? There, Hawker and Stapley. There they are. There we go. Ah, they came on the Julia Ann. They came on the Julia Ann in 1854. So,
Okay.
yeah, and they left the 22nd of March, 1854. They arrived in San Pedro, June 12th, 1854. Thomas and Charlotte Hawker with their kids. And then, yeah, oh, the Stapleys, of course, the Stapleys. Yeah, definitely. I'll show you what I have on my Lyman and Rich Wagon train, the master data set here. If only I had a data guru, IT person.
Yeah, we're gonna have to stop in about 5 minutes.
Okay. Anyway, so what I have here, for each person, and if you picked a person on the train you want me to look at, I can show you. But I can tell you what list they were on or whatever, and then if they were on the census, did they live in the fort? Did they tithe? When did they buy property? Were they a leader? What did they do in the recall? Where were they later? Did they join the RLDS? All of that. So for each of the people on the train.
Kristine, I'm gonna have to, I had plans in a little bit, so I'm gonna have to.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, we're having too much
It's
fun.
been great. And those that have more questions, if you have their email address, are they sending you?
Yeah, so Tom is collecting those, I
Best thing
think.
to do, yeah.
Yeah, so if you have more questions, and I do really hope for a way to be able to make this information accessible to other people. It's just, I'm not sure exactly how, but that's what it's here for, is to share it,
Yeah. Well, this is a terrific presentation, and
Thank you, Meg.
I
Excellent.
learned a lot. I've talked to you about what you're going to be talking about, but I still learn more.
Good.
And it's been really, really wonderful.
I'm glad.
And we'd like to schedule you, in the future, not too distant future,
Great.
soon future, I guess, to
Great.
speak to our historical society again.
It's super
For
fun.
those that are, we have about 19 or 20 people still here. I'd like to just thank everybody for tuning in. And it's been a pleasure to meet everybody virtually. And hopefully sometime fairly soon, we can start meeting at the Historical Society. I had one question earlier about membership dues with the San Bernardino Historical Society. If you'd like to be a member, it's $30 per year. that includes invitation to all our programs, which this is our first one in a year, but we're going to start having monthly programs open to the public. We have an online quarterly publication, and we're going to start some outdoor field trips. And I have an email list of close to 400 people. So if you got an email from Yankee Nut, that was me that you got the email from. And if you, again, if you'd like to be a member, it's $30 per year. We have the Historical Society has a PayPal account. It's SB Pioneer at yahoo.com. So SB Pioneer at yahoo.com. And if you want to snail mail your membership, it's it's San Bernardino Historical and Pioneer Society, P.O. Box 875, San Bernardino, California, 92405. And that's about it. I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in, and everybody have a wonderful day.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks
Thank you,
so much.
Kristine.
You're so welcome. Appreciate it. And
Appreciate
I love
it.
meeting you guys. I love it. Thank you.
Thank you. We loved it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I
Thank
feel
you,
like I've got a bigger community now, and I'm just very happy about that.
You
All
do.
right.
You have a big community of fans.
Thank you. This is really wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nick.
Okay, you're welcome. Thank
Thank
you.
Bye,
you.
Diane.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, Sue.
See you soon.
Good night, John Boy. Oh, that's hey, have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye now.